in silver, you know, if you look back historically, it typically is like a 2-year run that it typically goes through. And the question, of course, that we're asking here and trying to ponder over is when's that 2-year run coming, and exactly how might it unfold, et cetera.
Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics, and today I'm excited to have a good friend and a great mind in the silver industry join me to dig into silver. Amazingly, as James Anderson joins us, silver actually up a little bit today, so great to have James of SD Bullion on to dig into the markets. And how are you doing today, my friend?
Good, Chris. Thanks for having me on your program. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you on because you really have a unique insight into the silver world. I love the interviews you do, and you talk with a lot of great guests, and you do some great research. So just to start with, as we are now in July of 2019, silver has rallied a little bit, not as much as gold, but where do you see the market at this point?
I mean, it feels like it's turning a little bit, you know, a lot more bullish, especially with gold of late. I think it's giving some people hope, especially with the Federal Reserve, you know, hinting at the fact that they may have to start cutting interest rates. You know, the question, I guess, is really amount of time that people have, you know, in the foreseeable future that they're willing to wait for this eventual play out that we all think is coming for precious metals. But in terms of, you know, the price coming up in the fall or this winter, you know, I'm not going to venture to guess even what that's going to be. Anyone that does that, hopefully they're technically using, you know, some good technical analysis to do it, because my expectation is that would be a little bit more accurate than a fundamental claim that I might make. The fundamental claim I'll probably end up making is going to be something longer term, whereas I speak a lot of times with technical analysis who, you know, they'll tell you, you know, what it's going to be come at the end of the year. They'll give you a range, typically pretty tight one, and give you an idea. So that's not my style. I'm not a technical guy. So the longer term, this is more of a slow game for me. It's more of, you know, when I talk to people about precious metals, I describe why it makes sense to have a prudent position in physical bullion outside of the financial system, right? Given today's current valuations of commodities versus the financial system, and especially precious metals versus all the fiat currencies out there, all the various debts that probably will go underpaid or underperformed. So I take, I guess, a longer term perspective for it. And my hope is that people that are listening to this there's other people who like to trade it and stuff. If they like to trade it, you know, you probably want to listen to the interviews I do with technical folks, but most of the time my angle will be fundamental driven. But as far as silver at $15, you know, where it could go, I mean, there's people out there right now saying it could run up to 18 pretty soon, and we may end up having a false breakout where it could run up for a bit and then drop back down. So, you know, it's hard to say. I like to simply dollar cost average and buy slowly but surely and get a prudent position. So when we eventually do have that run, I'm not scrambling and paying through the eye with premiums and, you know, having difficulty even sourcing the stuff. So.
Yeah, it's a great point you mentioned there, James, because it's not, I don't remember studying another market like this where it's kind of hard to make a price prediction, because it feels to me as if we're in a somewhat of a binary situation where while the manipulation and all this short paper is still determining price, you really don't know what can happen. But like you said, if you look from a longer term perspective where there's a lot of paper out there now, silver trading below the cost of production, is that a fair assessment of how to look at it?
I think so. I did sometimes for Silver Doctors, I do a weekly interview called Metals and Markets. It's basically a wrap for the week. And sometimes there'll be an issue where a person that I want to interview maybe fell through for some reason, this or that. And I'll have to just kind of make a video up from scratch just to make sure that people get and do receive at least a weekly wrap to the week. And just a couple of weeks back, I did a video about when to sell silver. Right. And I broke out a chart that's a very good chart that's done by Nick Lard over at goldchartsrs.com. And it's a chart that essentially shows silver prices in the entire fiat currency era. So from 1970 to today in 2019. And what it uses is the standard spot price that we see, you know, day to day, and it's using daily data aggregated. It also shows a line where it shows the Eastern price aggregated day to day outside of the Western trading hours. and then it shows a Western trading price. And there's huge divergences that have begun. If you look at it, there's huge divergences, much more so in silver than in gold. And the silver side in this video, you'll see there's various price times and points throughout this entire fiat currency era where both the West and Eastern silver price finally converge. And it's at those times where, looking backwards, it made sense to start divesting some of your silver holdings into perhaps other asset classes. I think it touched a few times in the run-up, I think with Buffett buying all that silver, essentially the same hoard that JP Morgan has, or just a little bit less that JP Morgan has in its COMEX warehouse. There was a time in March of 2008 when the price was $21. Would have been a pretty good time to probably, divest some of that silver into perhaps cash and just hold for a bit, and then buy silver, when it gets back down in the low teens or back in the single digits like it did. So right now, the Eastern price, this blue line, I think it's right around $80 an ounce. Whereas, here in spot price land, we're still in the 15s, and it, it basically coincides really well with the Western dominant price discovery mechanism. But there are times when commodities pop out and it really starts to run, and silver does its crazy magic for 6 to 18 months, where those lines converge. And my hunch is they will eventually converge again, like they have before, multiple occasions. And when that time comes, it'll be time to, hopefully by then you'll already have places where you're thinking about going with some of these holdings and divesting a little bit. I'm not saying you sell everything at once. It's just like when you acquire it, you do it slowly but surely. But when you go to sell, it's pretty similar. You kind of do it in steps. You don't do it all at once. And you always maintain some prudent position, because Lord knows, you never know what could happen in this world. As far as, just emergencies and stuff, it's always nice to have some dry powder. And when I mean dry powder, I mean bullion first and maybe some cash second.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It reminds me of 2011. We talked before, I had some option positions on, so things were looking good for a while. I didn't sell near the top because I guess the tricky thing is that part of why so many are drawn to silver and gold is that we do see one day where the dollar doesn't come back. And so I appreciate you mentioning really, how do you even think about selling? Because that's a tricky thing. Do you sell and go back into dollars, or maybe at some point, if silver rises and you have a large position, maybe do you look for, if real estate is crashing, then is that when you take some silver and pick up a house or other assets that are undervalued?
Yeah, it's a combination of a few things. I think a lot of people sometimes they take it to the farthest extreme where they think it's like German hyperinflation time. I don't necessarily think that's gonna occur. We could have a really bad inflation though. Things could get out of hand. My hunch is, if you talk about all the different things that can happen in like an upside down bell curve, from everything working out perfectly to, either extreme, everything bullish or everything extremely bearish. I'm guessing we're probably around this area. Yeah. Between, eventually going to a place where, if you look back at the past reserve currency that went wayward, it's the British pound. And if you look at their inflation in the 70s and pretty much where it stands today, it's just weakened precipitously over this time frame. And if you look at their economy now, it's just a shell of what it was before when they were an empire. So essentially, that's what I look at when I think of the United States. I just, kind of look out, not just my generation, not just my lifetime, but also even, my child's lifetime. And I just don't think we're ever going to be as powerful as an empire 50 years from now as we are today. I just don't think that we're maintaining, our planning isn't as good as perhaps some people might think. And I just don't think we can maintain such a dominant position. But I don't necessarily think that the US dollar is just going to die, like flat out not work. It's just too entrenched. And in 2011, I didn't realize, I didn't give it enough gravitas to understand fully how important it is for the financial system. And it literally makes us still a powerful empire. And it makes a lot of us who are lucky enough to be born in the United States a lot better off than we probably would have been if we've been born in an emerging market in some, small country somewhere and not have had as many opportunities or as much purchasing power. So it's like a dual-edged sword in the sense of, you can see it kind of waning and waxing and you kind of want to prepare for that. But I'm not sitting here cheering for that. I'm not sitting here hoping that the dollar goes up in flames so my bullion position does well. That's not what you want. You just want to hedge it and protect your wealth first and foremost. And there are times when bullion outperforms virtually everything. And so it'd be nice to catch a little of that as well.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I have that same thought where it's on one hand, if you're invested in gold or silver or assets that are tied to that, then there's the part of you that wants to see it go up. Obviously, like you point out, that could mean things are happening in the world that aren't ideal. Although perhaps another twist to that is that, geez, you look at the way the dollar is used to facilitate. I mean, these guys talk about cryptos being used to facilitate dirty deals. I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to imagine something used for more nefarious purposes than the dollar.
Sure.
So part of me does look forward to the other side of that, where hopefully it's a more honest way of life where, you know, you're not being taxed half your salary so they can go play war games and whatnot. But
yeah, I agree. I think a good cleansing would be nice. Just hopefully in that cleansing process, it's not as tumultuous as some may paint or think it could get. My hope is it doesn't get as bad as some people may believe it could get. That's all.
yeah, and interesting in my studies of Austrian economics, and certainly folks who have seen more of these cycles than I have, I do find it interesting how once you stop, it's like if you bust your knee up and you keep smashing it with a hammer, it can heal once you stop doing that. So, although as you mentioned, unfortunately, our current government planning,
Yeah, it's
our largest creditors and trading partners.
but I think it's not like it's hopeless, the situation. It just requires some adults to get in the room and actually deal with the situation in an adult way. I think the issue, though, becomes how large and vast the situation is with the demographics and the lack of savings of the baby boom generation. They kind of have to nurse that along. And that's, I think, what you see a lot with the propping up of the economy and the making sure that the financial system doesn't go through a 2008 bust again. And, you know, having everything under control, essentially, so that they can dictate. So Empire can dictate what Empire wants, essentially.
Well, in 10 seconds, you've overqualified yourself against anyone who's actually running. Anyway, to get back to our favorite topic of silver, one of the things I think about, again, I get it. People are saying, you know, we hear it's manipulated. They're writing the paper contracts and they get that. You know, okay, so it is what it is. But in terms of thinking, all right, what, you know, is what finally ends this? Certainly, you know, if JP Morgan does have all that silver and they want a couple $2 billion, it certainly seems plausible. That's one outcome. Although perhaps even more in the near term, you know, we have silver below the cost of production. We're seeing mines get shut down. We're seeing supply go down. According to the Silver Institute, we've run a deficit in, I think, like 4 or 5 of the last 6 or 7 years. So especially if the demand stays where it is, and if we ran a small deficit last year and now supply falls, at some point, where does that metal come from?
Yeah, that's a good question. There is a decent amount. I've done the research on this. You know, back when I first got in this industry and I started investing in this in like 2006-ish, 2005, there was a situation where literally there was only like a 500 million ounces of silver sitting in inventory above ground. That has grown a lot since because of all the interest in the sector and a lot of people and investors buying it. I believe there's roughly about 4 billion ounces of investment grade silver sitting above ground. Okay, so that doesn't take into account the 90% silver or the silverware or the artifacts and all the other things that would be very difficult to melt down so quickly if there was demand enough to do it. But 4 billion ounces of silver is like absolutely nothing in the financial system.
Right.
So if you have enough people really concerned about currency and they want to get out of currency and into something else that they feel is money, well, gold is going to be one of those things, and silver will probably be one of those things, a la 2009 to 2011, when people were still concerned after the 2008 financial crisis that the Fed didn't have control of things. I was one of those people, and you know, I saw silver run from $9 to $50. And I saw the variations of the different investors buying at all these different times. And you can kind of see when you're living through that, the example of like a mania chart. And you have like the smart money buying at $9, $10, $11, $12, coming in, buying 6 figures, 7 figures of bullion. And then the smart money coming back when it's 40 and just, you know, they're not going to get poor taking profits. So they divested some of those gains. You know, they did a 3-bagger in bullion in the fiat price, and they felt like, yeah, maybe now it's time to put it in something else. And so that was a little microcosm of what happens. And in silver, you know, if you look back historically, it typically is like a 2-year run that it typically goes through. And the question, of course, that we're asking here and trying to ponder over is when's that 2-year one coming, and exactly how might it unfold, et cetera, et cetera. I think on the margin, it's like the most important thing for silver to do really well is you really need to see more retail interest. You need to see more wholesale buying. I'm talking when at wholesale level, you need people who are millionaires coming in and buying it. And so you need to start seeing the mints, the amount that they're selling go up. You need to start seeing inventories and ETFs go up. And as well, I mean, on the supply side, industry keeps coming up with new ways to use silver. And as time goes on, my hunch is silver's just got so many applications that we're going to continue to want to use it. And so that 4 billion ounces of silver that's sitting amongst investors, I think ultimately that stuff's going to get used in industry in the coming century or so. I just think that application scientifically, so long as we don't explode this planet, we're going to keep needing silver and mining the hell out of the ground. It's very difficult to do, and it's very costly. And I don't think we're going to be mining asteroids anytime soon, no matter what Elon Musk might think or any of these other people dreaming about mining asteroids. It's not coming anytime soon. So that 4 billion ounces of silver, like I said, it's not much. You're talking about in the whole scheme of things, like $70 billion. $70 billion is nothing. I mean, in the world of, I mean, we have like 280 trillion in total assets in the world. 280 trillion versus billion. I mean, you gotta sit there and think about that, because it's hard to think through, but we're talking about multiples of tens of thousands more of assets versus how much investment grade silver there is. It's a joke. It's like a speck in the wind.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I know obviously you talk with a lot of people who are buying and selling metals all day. For years, we've heard a lot of people who are longtime gold and silver bulls just throwing in the towel and just can't take any more. So it's interesting when you think about that 4 billion ounces of silver or however much is out there. I would imagine at this point, a lot of it is owned by folks who aren't looking for a $1 or $2 rise, but, generally have a similar mindset where they're thinking, all right, I'm holding this silver as insurance. So even if it goes, I mean, I'm guessing if silver goes up to $20, you're not going to say, wow, this is great, I'm selling my whole stash. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, there is some silver out there, but are those people going to sell it?
The amount of strong hands that you're describing versus the weaker hands, there are still weaker hands out there who bought in the 2009 to 2011 run up probably, and who probably bought in the 40s. I mean, I myself remember buying a case of Silver Eagles for like 22 grand, Yep. I mean, I look back on it and it's like, well, it's just like, if I sold that, at least I could take a tax loss. I mean, it's just, but that's the problem. When you dollar cost average, you're going to buy sometimes at really low prices and sometimes you're going to buy at really high prices. But that's one that I always think about and laugh about. Had I just jammed that into Bitcoin, I probably wouldn't be talking to you on this podcast.
Be a little too busy on the beach.
Yeah. No, but I mean, life is interesting like that. I mean, I'm glad. I'm happy with where I'm at right now. So it's fun to kind of play around with that, though. But the whole point of it is, yeah, along the way, there's going to be people who've either passed away and bought silver. They're people who it was handed down to, or probably looking to sell, when it makes a little sense to them. So we're going to have to go through some of, if you imagine there's 4 billion ounces of silver, I would imagine 500 million of it's probably in weak hands that would be willing to sell it when they either break even or make a little bit of profit and move on to something else. But you're right. I think a good portion of that understand the fundamental reasons. They kind of drilled that into their mind in the last 10 years using the internet. And I think they understand the longer game involved here. And it's not just when silver hits 21 bucks, I'm going to take a 20% profit or whatever. It's a bigger issue to that. It's a deeper thing.
Yeah, and then add on whenever someone starts to try and unwind all of this paper that's still just sitting out there. Sure will be fascinating. And perhaps the last question for you today, James. I know you've heard of this one article from Alistair McLeod last week where he says, is there a silver whale, someone acquiring a lot of silver in the market? Any thoughts on that one?
I didn't actually end up getting to see the article. Could you explain a little bit about what he was intonating in it, maybe?
He was looking through, breaking down the COT report and implying that he sees that someone is acquiring a large position of silver, I think, over the past couple years.
What size was he talking?
I don't know that he put a size on it, although I guess one of my reactions was that I mean, geez, forget about whether JP Morgan's buying Silver Eagles or taking money out of SLV. Just the fact that on their COMEX report shows, was it up to like 150 million
53. Yep.
ounces? And I know some people say
Brinks has been like this the last year or so too. Brinks is up to near 50 in New York, and that means typically in that area, there's a lot of high-end investors who are holding it there and trading on the COMEX as well.
yeah, so I mean, whether it's JP Morgan, some think they're holding it for China, or it could be some other customer, but at least there is some large position for someone that I believe that's bigger than the amount of physical and the Hunt brothers held. Maybe not if you add in their derivatives,
But the actual bullion, they held about 120 million ounces, I believe. And, people always, that's a totally interesting story, the Hunt brothers thing. People always say that that's why silver went to 50. No, it's about 8 or 10 other commodities that went four-bagger at the same time.
Yep.
The US dollar was really in question. Volcker obviously fixed that by raising interest rates, but the Hunt brothers was just a scapegoat job. I mean, that was one of the ultimate scapegoat jobs, if you know anything about that story. But to stick back on this, as far as someone acquiring a position in silver, I mean, anyone looking at silver at $15 a day, anyone who understands the fundamentals about it in the long term, the potentiality of it, its upside potential versus its downside potential at the moment, would understand that the risk-reward profile at this moment is about as good as it's ever been. And so I would not be surprised if somebody who was going heavy in, I mean, Bill Gates, for instance, that guy was a huge silver mine share owner back when his buddy, Warren Buffett, was buying huge amounts of silver. Who do you think told Bill Gates about silver? My hunch is it's probably his buddy. So, I mean, it's just a matter of time before you start seeing some heavy money coming into this sector. So, I mean, Alistair McLeod's done always really, really good research. His research on physical gold flows into China from 1980 to today is probably one of the best out there on the subject. I mean, people always talk about the physical gold flows from the late 90s to now with China, but he's even gone back double decades talking about how much was probably taken at that point too. And so, that guy doesn't write things just, flim flam with no reasoning. So I'll be interested to go find that article after we end this discussion.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned in there, also interesting with Warren Buffett, because I get questions from time to time, if gold and silver is so great, how come Warren Buffett is always against them? Interestingly, we're doing a roundtable on Friday, digging into some of the things his father Howard, who was a sound money advocate, said, and some of the things Warren says. Although you guys actually had a great post that I loved where it digs into Warren's silver position, and you have even a video clip of one of his investor meetings. And interesting, everything he said about silver then is even more in play now. So again, if anyone's wondering at home, you don't have to take my word or James's word, but there's Warren as well, despite his gold comments. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting how he poo-poos it. Yet makes billions off of compounding. He wants to be a stock market player who wants to constantly stay there and have his money compound because, I'm sure his daddy told him gold and silver were good. So he probably is doing the opposite of his daddy. And that's fine. I mean, good for you, billionaire, but don't dissuade middle-class average people from having a protective savings that they can control and hold outside the financial system. That doesn't make any sense. You should have always some hedge because our forefathers, I mean, they literally wrote that into the law. And if you do any data studying of anything in terms of financial crises, it always was prudent to have some bullion. So Warren Buffett obviously knows silver. He obviously went really long in silver and he traded too early. And he admits that, I believe, in the discussion we're talking about. His buddy Charlie Munger is sitting there poo-pooing it the whole way. But you could tell Warren Buffett was a bull and he understood the fundamental case for it. And he went large and he made good money, not as much as he could have if he waited till 2011. But anyone who doesn't understand that story needs to go deeper and understand silver a little bit better because you got to know about the Hunt brothers. You got to know about Warren Buffett. Those are the types of things you got to understand about because this is a small market. You get something like that happening, it can make big changes in the spot price.
Yeah, and James, fortunately, you're one of the folks out there that is doing a great job of sharing these things and pointing them out so that folks can see them. So perhaps just wrapping up, if you could let folks know where to find you and keep up with the great things you're doing.
Sure. At SD Bullion, I do a lot of the content creation for them. So SD Bullion /blog. I mean, I've written over 200 articles there in the last year and a half or so. on our YouTube channel as well. There's a lot of videos I've done. And then every Friday, I do a metals and markets wrap for Silver Doctors, where I typically interview different experts like yourself in the industry. And then occasionally, like I said, I'll do a little video that's just my own where, like, for instance, a couple weeks ago, I did one about when to sell silver that maybe your listeners might find interesting. So go check that out.
Yeah, well, I'm a listener and a fan. We'll put the link to that below so people can find you. Again, appreciate you joining me today and talking some silver. And fascinating time in the world when it unfolds. We will see, but we'll look forward to checking in with you again soon.
Thanks, Chris. I'm so glad you're along for the ride. It'll be fun times, I think.